Welcome to the Tech and Space Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Don Pickering. He is the CEO of Sysmeta. Welcome to the show, Don.
Oh, thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for making time to be here. Perhaps we can have you start with just a little overview about your background and then tell us a little bit about Sysmeta.
Yeah, so I have been a tech entrepreneur now for, I think, since 1995. I launched my first company in September 95. It was an internet company building websites and writing some of the first internet applications for large, NASA, Boeing, large companies here. And I've been through a progression of companies, probably 5 to 6 companies since then, and have really focused more and more on impact-based businesses. Really, for the last 20 years, I've been driven and choosing what I do based on the impact of the companies that I'm building, and so that brought me into Sysmeta. I, in particular, was very concerned about climate change and the impact of climate change on food security, water, energy. And I didn't quite know what to do with that, but I met my business partner he's based in London, and it was a real perfect union when we met. His background was working with British intelligence for 20 years and building technology to map terror groups and human trafficking networks, and essentially use the collective intelligence and the intelligence of networks to take out bad guys. And he also, through that intelligence work, saw in the intelligence reports coming down and that talked about the impact of climate change on food and food security, and the civil implications of that, and civil instability that can occur from that. So he transitioned out of intelligence, began working with large corporates to help them accelerate their transition to regenerative or sustainable practices, as well as building resiliency to climate change. So he was doing that in the analog. And then when we met, my background in building large scale sort of advanced software that does hard things, it was a really good fit. And so we began working on Sysmeta 2.5 years ago. We're actually just launching here. And what Sysmeta is it's an AI platform that finds the optimal pathways to orchestrate the deployment of capital and technology and companies to a desired outcome. And so in this case, in the world of food, it's like, how do we make sure that our money is going to the technologies and the teams that most need it and can have the most impact, right? And how do we ensure that we understand all the components of a system to move it? So we're really addressing the siloed nature of this world, where people invest in technology without understanding the whole breadth of what's available and what really works and what doesn't. There's people that invest in technology don't know the supply chains and how to get those technologies to be used and introduced into the market systems. And then we fund all kinds of transition projects that don't take into account best practices of technology and teams. And so just stepping up one layer up and providing a layer that orchestrates all that intelligence and knowledge, we can de-risk the entire system for everybody and bring more money to the projects that need it, and actually shorten the time that it takes for us to achieve resilience and to maximize our ability to feed people in the face of a changing climate. And so we're really focused on doing this for ag and energy. We've been working with the British government. We have a pending significant grant with them, $10+ million grant that's will be coming due this spring. And as part of that, we'll be working with a supercomputer they have to help process this. So it's, the first instance of Sysmeta will be to essentially create a data observatory for climate change for the British government, and then from there help them figure out how to make the right investments and do the right programmatic work to ensure as much resilience as possible relative to energy and food. So yeah, it's very exciting work.
Wow,
I know.
that sounds really amazing. So, like, if you were to just kind of narrow it down,
Yeah.
what is the major problem that Sysmeta is solving here?
The major problem is that we have absolute inefficiencies, and we have all the money and all the technology and all the resources to solve our major problems and crises that we face. What we lack is the prioritization and the coordination to do that. So we're really focused on de-risking the investments and maximizing the impact of our efforts and our resources so that we can be as efficient as possible. And so it's being able to cut through complexity to understand the most important things to do and how to make them work. So it's an AI platform that results in structural change of our infrastructure relative to agriculture and energy. So rather than AI that, chat bots that do cute tricks, this is actually using AI for systemic change of how we organize our corporations and our governments and our food systems and supply chains, right? So
Right.
and understanding the intricacies of those to one another, and that's it's just and that's primarily what we're doing. I know it's a little there's some complexity to it because inherently we're working in the world of complexity, but it's how do we find the most important things to do and really focus on that.
Right. From like an investing perspective, right? So we're kind
Yeah.
of putting your money where it's going to make the biggest difference. Is
Yeah.
that a
Yeah.
good way to
And
put
then
it?
understanding how and who, from a blended perspective, who being able to use that intelligence to bring the right money in at the right time and coordinate that, right? Because oftentimes there's so many hands off. If you look at like the development of a technology company, it's like, how do we know that what's developed in the university is even the most important thing to develop systemically, right?
Right,
How do
right.
and then how do we, in finding those promising technologies, right, using AI and federated learning, we can figure out what those are. How do we support them from to see that they get the funding that they need? And then how do we bring them into real world pilots? Like in the case of agriculture, there's technologies that can transform agriculture, but how do we actually get them onto farms and to understand the economics and the impact and the true yield impact that those technologies can have? It takes somebody that's above being just an investor, right? Or
Yeah.
just being a technology person to understand that. You need to understand how that system of agriculture works, from technology to farm to contracts and supply, right? And that's something that we have major problems in our food system, and particularly with food around like, just look how hard it is to get eggs and the pricing of orange juice and eggs right now, right? Perfect
Yeah.
example of that. If we have security of supply issues for critical food stock, our food system can break down very, very quickly. And so farmers are struggling, the CPGs are struggling, right? And so and our our soil is struggling too through nutritional and mineral degradation from monocrop farming over and over. So how do we look at this as a system? How do we use AI to be able to understand who's doing what and what's possible, and then provide that coordination? And the net result is more money will flow to the things that make the biggest difference with a more predictable return, which then allows more money to come in. So there's this huge funding gaps that exist that require more intelligence as to where they're deployed. And so we honed in on the capital piece because there is a lot of money, family offices, up to Wall Street, that wants to support our transition away from fossil fuels and away from practices that maybe got us to where we are, but are no longer working in the world that we need to be living in. But
Sure.
how do we accelerate that capital flow, de-risk it, and maximize the return of it? And that's really what we're focused on. And AI can actually provide so much. Like the AI system to do that is fully possible, and it's, we can build that now with AI tools and technology. We can build for 50 million what would have cost a $500 million to do just 5 years ago. And so that's what's so fascinating, is that this application of technology to do that is a real exciting opportunity.
That is really exciting. So tell me a little bit more about the AI aspects of this, because of course, AI is complete buzzword, and so it's like everybody just says AI, but how are you actually leveraging AI
Yeah.
to support Sysmeta, and like what data sets are you taking into account and things like that? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first step is being able to put the data and orchestrate it in a way that allows you to work with it, right? So we have all this disparate information. It could be satellite data, weather data, financial information, supplier data, right? And if we can put that into a system that normalizes our ability, you can do what's called cross-vector analysis, where you can take this information, and this is hard, this is not easy work, but you create a system where you can cross-analyze that and work with all of that data. And that might include, and some of this comes from the intelligence world, what they call signal data, maybe unstructured data. It's reaching into information that often isn't accessed, but it could still be valuable. And then once you have that, you can then use AI, right, to pull from that data and to understand not just the relationships of things, right? This is where, you've heard that, like, um, causality, it's like correlation doesn't equal causality, right? Well, there's
Yeah.
causal AI that can actually move beyond correlation to understand what's influencing what, right? And so there's different types of AI, and it's called agentic AI, where you use different AI agents to do different things. And so based on what that need is, or what that test case, once we have the information in place that we can work with it, then we can use the appropriate AI to understand to move it through and translate it to an actionable path, right? And
Right.
that might be some of the AIs around, as I mentioned, federated learning, that could scan thousands of technologies to look for outliers that are outperforming other things, and outperforming in terms of yield or cost or effectiveness or efficacy of some sort. Or
Sure.
you can use AI that can understand these interrelationships as well. And so it, I don't, there's some secret sauce there, and I can't talk into too many specifics, but
Sure.
the component technology all exists. This is not what needs to happen, is just to stitch that together. And I think what's interesting is that there's a lot of AI that's developed that does really, cute things, like connects our toasters to our, like our calendars and things like that. But what we're focused on and what we're interested is, how do we use AI to actually more create more accountability with where we're putting spending our money and what we're doing,
Hmm.
to create real-time systems that are always evaluating how well things are actually working versus what's possible, right? And
Right.
to ultimately see that we're using our resources in the right way. We waste so much effort and money on dead-end technologies. Like, and I see this all the time when you look at grant funding, and as you know, with OLIS, my last company, we had grant funding from NASA and DoD and DOE. Oftentimes those grants are selected by a small, maybe a committee of 10 or 15 people. They're not looking at some central database of other competing technologies,
Yeah.
some of which, or other people that maybe funded something similar, but it was a dead end. And how can we integrate, like, all available intelligence, right, all the way up to collective intelligence, down, fractal down to an individual and everything in between, right? To know that we're using the right information and best available information to make more informed decisions.
Right,
And
right.
it's
So,
to
oh,
me
go
that, and as part of that, plug people in, right? Like I think
ahead.
that, fundamentally it comes down to like a bigger philosophy of this world of like a lot of people feel disenfranchised and disconnected. They feel like their talents they don't get to use their talent or their unique genius. They have intentions but don't know where to start. And I think that this concept of also plugging, if it's plugging people or technologies or companies into the opportunities that make the most sense, that we can, in a way, leverage human ingenuity and capital with much more efficiency than we are. And the net result of that is, less waste. I think less of a more opportunity for more people, and more resilience to climate change, because climate change is real and it's happening. And the impact of climate change on food and food production is a very serious problem. We're already losing over 22% of our crops right now in the US, potatoes, just to climate related events. And in other places in the world, they're looking at 40% crop failures. And the estimates are that will increase 10% additional crop failure per 1 degree Celsius climate temperature increase. So we need to
Yikes.
get
So clearly we need to do something, right? Something different than we have been doing. Absolutely. So when earlier on, you kind of mentioned that you're launching today officially. Is that right?
this next week. Yeah,
Oh,
we just
okay.
finalized our deck today for a fundraise.
Okay.
And so yeah, we're kicking off with our first raise. It's interesting. We really wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing. I think in the past I would have raised $10 million and built the technology, but ultimately we've spent incredible amount of time talking with like governments and corporations and the asset managers and asset owners and Wall Street to really define the problem and the opportunity, as because to me this work is so important. And I think having alignment with partners, with the right partners that we can really scale this is important. And so yeah, we're just kicking this off. We've got this grant pending with the UK government, but ultimately our intention is, I think, for the right asset manager could see this is great for portfolio management and optimization, but we don't want this just to be for one company. We want to actually bring this to the entire market. And then we want to have a foundation where we can provide these capabilities to developing countries and nonprofits and sort of have this philanthropic aspect of it too. And so that just takes a little bit more work up
Uh-huh.
front. But having an absolutely incredible team and a lot of access, and there's a lot of has come through thousands of hours worth of work just to really get the company spec right. So I'm very excited about it. I think this is certainly the most important work I have ever done, and it really feels like my entire career has brought me to this point. But it's exciting to be able to work on something that could truly impact. I mean, we have one project in Brazil that we're supporting is 300,000, working with 300,000 farmers to become resilient to climate change.
Wow.
And so how do we take all the small coffee farmers in Brazil and understand what's unique to them and where they are, overlay that with climate data and climate models to understand what farmers are at what risk and what order, and how we can give them the education, the information, and the resources to maybe plant different varietals or do things in slightly different ways, or to have greater like long-term, what they call offtake agreements, which are contracts that set up more security of supply for the companies, as well as predictable business for the farmers and predictable pricing. And everybody wins when we do this work. And so
Right.
this is just for big corporations, but it can be for small farmers and landholders as well. And this technology, while we're starting with agriculture and energy, it could also be used for healthcare. It could be used for education. It could be used really for so many different things. And that's where, we're really excited to build this. And I think this is this it's something from a legacy perspective that I just feel really good about doing. And I think that and that's important too. I think,
That's
right? We want
great.
to know that we're looking on things that make a real difference in this world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So if somebody wanted to learn more about Sysmeta, what should they do?
Well, Sysmeta.com is, although we're a little quiet about what until we go to full launch on that. And I'm also happy to talk to people directly. And so my email is don@sysmeta.com. I think that's okay to say.
Yeah, sure.
And I am always happy to talk with people and to share more. Yeah, and so I think it can be family offices or investors, people who have maybe technologies that could be helpful where they're looking to get them into market. We're creating a system that sort of connects these people. So that's something that I think there's a lot of benefit, to people across the board with what we're doing. But we're US and UK focused right now. We also are doing some work in Brazil, as I mentioned, but yeah, so I am more than happy to talk to people if they're interested.
Excellent. Well, I'm really excited to see as you bring this to fruition what all happens. It sounds really exciting and really inspiring.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and we'll have to stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making time to be here today. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.